Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the LF0 podcast. My name is Anthony, and I'm the host for this particular episode. Today, we'll be talking about the topic that's been making waves recently, but really has been prevalent and a huge part of the space since the early days, which is compliance, digital assets, how the space evolves, how does it adjust to government needs, how does it cooperate with different regulators in our space in various jurisdictions. And our guest today is Michael Kunz, legal partner at MME. We've been working with Michael and his team since 2018, since the very early days of the LF0 Foundation, and have been reliant on his expertise in multiple different situations. So we've been always excited and always confident about the work that we do together, and the project definitely wouldn't be in the place that it is now. MME itself is an innovative law firm and also, to an extent, I guess, a consulting firm specializing in legal, tax, and compliance for not only digital assets, but the digital assets team, I think, is the most known one across the space. We've had the pleasure also of working with the team behind trademarks. Also, great job on that one when it comes to securing the LF0 trademark, the tax teams, various teams supporting HR processes. And MME itself was also involved in setting up the original design of the Ethereum Foundation, which is what I believe you guys did as the first in the space. Now, Mike, it's awesome to have you on the show. So thank you so much for coming in and taking the time out of your day. If you wouldn't mind just providing our listeners a bit of background on yourself, your role at MME, and your experience with the industry so far.
Yeah, more than happy to do so. Yeah, first of all, thanks, Anthony, for the kind intro and yeah, for having me here. It's always great to collaborate on with you guys and also in these ways. I personally, so for the listeners, I'm a lawyer, licensed in Switzerland and the United States. I have concluded my studies in Zurich originally, moved to the States for a few years and set for the bar there as well. And I think that was really important for me because it gave me a great outlook and allowed me to really dive in the work here because, I mean, first of all, all the work is done in English. That was something new. But the other thing is that I did actually have enough time before joining MME to do a deep dive on crypto. So when I actually joined MME, I had half a year of prep time, so to say, because I still wanted to conclude my time in the US. And so I could really hit the ground running when I joined the team in 2017. And as you have mentioned, Anthony, that was in the middle of the ICO craze. I mean, we do remember these days. I guess many listeners remember them as well. And I mean, it was truly exciting. We just had, we have established the Ethereum Foundation 2015, or MME, the MME team has done so. We basically invented the ICO, so to say, and obviously we had a lot of requests of people that wanted to join MME and work with us and actually launch the projects out of Switzerland. It was very interesting to see how these projects came to us and they all wanted to do the same thing, which was really interesting because they have a lot of different design ideas when it comes to products. They're extremely innovative, but you see that innovation is not really there when it comes to structuring and legal. And so, I guess that really played in our favor at that time because people said, okay, Ethereum went to Switzerland, they did an ICO there, they chose the foundation. And so most people really came to us and says, they want to do exactly the same thing. And so, for the LF0 Foundation, that made tons of sense because of the obvious similarities between Ethereum and LF0 as a layer one protocol. But then we had all these other projects that wanted to do the same. And so we learned early on that every crypto project is very different, not only from a regulatory perspective, but also from, the company type or a legal entity type that it needs. And they have different needs, when it comes to regulatory compliance. I was really excited to join the team then, and I'm really happy now that I was able to contribute in that interesting times. We also were lucky enough to have enough work during the crypto winter bear market of 2018-19. I guess a lot of projects didn't make it at the time, and a lot of service providers disappeared as well because obviously, you need to be able to continue to contribute, and otherwise, you just cannot evolve with the technology. And I think that's the other thing that is really important because since I have been working in a space for 6 years now, a bit more, we've seen a lot. A lot of good things, a lot of bad things, and it's just super exciting to be part of this. What has also shifted, obviously, over time is that, our initial customers, and I guess that includes you as well, really helped us, get a good understanding on the technology because it is unique. Blockchain, it's not intuitive, I would say. It takes some time to actually understand what's really going on, what really defines Web3. And so I would say, projects now benefit from all that work because when we have introduction calls now with clients, the first thing they always say is, okay, it's fascinating to talk a legal provider that actually understands these things. And, we had a head start and we kept the head start. And, we look forward to many more exciting years. Maybe, the last thing for myself, I joined 6.5 years ago. I became partner last year. And have been, we actually have just added 2 new partners to the team, which, very much excites us because it really shows that, there's so much to do still. And mainly that Switzerland really is still a prime location for crypto projects. And that's one of the things we really want to do in the future to attract more projects to come to Switzerland, because we realize that it's much easier to sell us than it is to sell Switzerland because there's always other jurisdictions that are joining the fight. We had Malta, Gibraltar in the early days. Now it's more Cayman Islands, BVI, and Dubai. So it's gonna stay interesting for sure.
Nice. Yeah, I remember when we were kind of deciding on the jurisdiction back in 2018, and actually, one of the reasons for choosing Switzerland was the overall feeling of stability and maturity, I would say, but also the fact that your team operates there, right? So if you want to kind of have an infrastructure set up and build a layer one, then how do you even go about choosing the jurisdiction? Well, you go and look at where the respected in the space ones are and reverse engineer it to an extent. So that's I would say, the backstory of how we wanted to be involved with the team at MME. With regards to like what got you into the space for the first time, because for me it was, I would say, the cross section of tech, of politics, of sociology. It's just like a really cool piece of technology that enables, at first, like years ago, I was like, okay, this is like really cool to build digital democracies, really, and digital payment systems. And you can essentially look at blockchains as small countries rather than companies, right? So for me, it was like this combination of various multiple things. And what combines all of it is this trustless nature of exchanging value online. What was it for you?
Yeah, I would say the same. I mean, honestly, I gotta say, when I applied at MME, I initially applied as an intellectual property lawyer, and when I had the interview, they told me that they had just established the Ethereum Foundation together with Vitalik and the team, and so I was really excited. I wanted to learn more about it. I heard about Bitcoin before. I never really I wanted to learn about it, but as I said, it was not intuitive. It was not very easy to find information back in the day, and so I guess what really spiked my interest is the fact that I never understood the limitations of the internet. Right? I always thought that, well, the internet is going to naturally evolve and continue to evolve. Right? I mean, we had Netscape Navigator, and then we had Uber and Airbnb, and so obviously I thought, okay, that's just going to continue like that. But then I realized, as you mentioned, that there is no way to exchange value peer to peer over the internet. And once you think about this, things get really interesting. And so for me, having all these people that want to build on this infrastructure has really shown me that there's a huge excitement around it. So, I have worked, earlier in a legal protection insurance company. I had, around 2,500 cases of people that were in trouble, small trouble or big trouble. But I just realized early on that I don't want to solve their trouble. I'd rather actually be active in an advisory capacity to avoid people ending up where these people ended up. And so that's the one thing. The other thing is that I guess the people in the crypto space are often very humble, and that I really figured that out early because there's a lot of gratitude when you work with people in the crypto space, when you help them, and it's just exciting to see, their dreams, come true. And I think, their excitement is contagious, and I think a lot of it is really coming from our customers.
That's nice to hear. I didn't know you were working in insurance, by the way. That's cool.
In my another life.
It's a tricky industry, but I'm also like, Now we're also talking about DeFi insurance. So I'm very interested to see how this vertical develops over the years. Like if you were to compare, the days when you started, and maybe like 2018 also with what we're seeing now, like there's definitely a lot more maturity and understanding from the regulatory standpoint. We've got MiCA going sort of live in Europe. We've got changes in the States. Like, what do you think is the overarching theme for all of this? Because, like, from where I'm sitting, I would say that crypto as a space has been essentially acknowledged overall. Like, this was the thing that kind of happened and led to finally regulators taking notice of it, and not just putting out ads like we've seen in 2018 that it's all a bubble, it's all fading away, it doesn't matter, and basically it's all a scam, to what we're seeing now, and the largest institutions saying that it is in fact the future rails for all things finance.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a fascinating topic because I think you have to distinguish between crypto as an asset class and crypto as a lifestyle or philosophy. And I mean, obviously, as an asset class, crypto has grown up. It has arrived, in the mainstream. While the media still talks about Bitcoin up, Bitcoin down, and doesn't really comment on anything else, you do see a lot of interest from CFI and financial intermediaries to want to pick up on this. The ETF news out of the US obviously it's a huge piece of information. Although I think we have to say that we've actually had for 5 years Bitcoin ETFs in Switzerland. So another good point to say, look, we've just have been ahead, and so it's great to see other jurisdictions follow. But the other thing is to see like the crypto philosophy, like really the cornerstones of crypto. I'm not sure if we have made a lot of progress there. And I'm just really the reason why I love crypto is not because I think it's awesome to actually diversify and hold Bitcoin and basically have it as a hedge against inflation. I mean, I see that argument and I say that's all cool, but in the end, what really got me into crypto was something very different. And I do see that our clients are still very creative when it comes to DeFi and other ideas. Talking about decentralized physical infrastructure networks like DPINs, which I think we have a few clients working in that space. Helium is not one of them, but I'm following them closely because I think it's fascinating how they work with T-Mobile and actually, use crypto in a way to make telecommunication capacity more accessible to people. So these use cases I think are fantastic. They're really, really cool to see how these are finally being brought to life. But I guess that's one of the reasons why we have this conversation, because we talk about regulation and we talk about how can we ensure that crypto is legitimate, how can we ensure that consumer protection are fulfilled. And in that conversation I often think that sometimes crypto is selling out its core ideas a little bit. And especially when you talk about the ETFs, the question is this a win for crypto, that basically we are getting into CeFi, or is it the other way around? Is it actually CeFi making crypto, more centralized? Because I think we have to, keep in mind that ETFs create intermediaries, and crypto is actually about getting rid of these intermediaries. And so I'm kind of like, a bit in both ways. I'm just really observing, and I think there's not really a lot we can do to avoid that. But overall, I do think that we are on a good path to adoption. I think that the fact that EU finally got around with MiCA to actually create some sort of regulatory framework is certainly good news, I would say, for the entire crypto space. It remains to be seen how MiCA is gonna affect crypto projects. So far, if my understanding is correct, it mainly affects centralized service providers and has very limited impact on token issuers. So that's good to see. I'm waiting for the US to finally do something, although listening to my colleagues in the United States, opinions differ, talking about stablecoin regulation or something even bigger. As anything there, it's very political. So I think, the crypto industry would do good and just, focus on their own strengths and not just continue to develop, because I think we cannot really wait for regulation to grow up in order to really reach mainstream adoption. I think if we want to really get to where we want to be, we need to have more applications to get more users and excited about crypto, and create a situation where regulators really have to acknowledge that crypto's here to stay. People like to use these products, and that we need to make sure that they can use them in a legal way.
In the end, it all comes down to the app layer, really. And I think we're all still collectively looking for those killer use cases that are going to bring, as folks say, 1 billion users. I would be happy with like 1 million or two. But I think we're going to get there at some point. Like Helium, from what I've read, I think yesterday or the day before that, they also rolled out the infrastructure with Telefonica in Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a cool use case. With ETFs, I'm of a similar opinion. And at the same time, it is definitely sort of legitimizing the space or the asset classes at least, and helps with distribution. But it does, yes, obviously compromise on the, well, decentralization and sort of permissionless access to it all. And like that being said, we touched upon MiCA. I would have two questions there. So first is, why is Switzerland moving faster than other jurisdictions, in most cases at least? Is it just the size? Is it the fact that there's a better dialogue between innovators and regulators and legal counsel? Is it just easier to introduce changes when, the country is fairly small and has this innovative mindset? So this would be the first question. And the second is if we could break down MiCA, maybe for those who may not be familiar with like the fundamental assumptions, and go into what's going to change and what it impacts essentially in the long run.
Yeah, so for the first question, I think it depends who you ask. I think there's a lot of reasons leading to it. I think that one of the main reasons for sure is that Switzerland has always been a light regulation country, right? We always have differed from the European Union in that particular point, not only from the different style of politics, like Switzerland is really more governed bottom up than top down. The other thing is we have a very strong federalist system where states have a lot of powers and can actually work as laboratories to figure out things, be it in the tax area, like less in regulation because that's national. But when you look at our financial market authorities, it's also important to note that they were run by people that were not hostile towards crypto. So basically, in Switzerland, we don't have one president; we have 7 ministers that actually form the executive, and our financial minister, Winnie Mauho, at that point, he was, extremely supportive. We've had people like, the founder of Bitcoin Swiss that actually have been early on talking with politicians, and so I think it's really a combination of all of the above. I guess the milestone really was that when we had the first ICOs, it was clear to us when I talked to my colleagues at the time how they approached it. It was clear to them how the law would apply, but it was only clear to us, right? And the idea never was that you have to go to a lawyer. You can only actually launch a crypto project if you have a business law firm, in your back. That's really also not the idea of crypto. The idea of crypto is that it's permissionless and that anybody can do it, right? And so you don't want to create these hurdles. And so what FINMA did at that point, I think, is not understood by many people what a game changer that brought. So when they released the ICO guidelines in 2018, they clarified a few things. So first of all, they introduced a very easy classification system distinguishing between asset tokens or security tokens, which are financial products and regulated accordingly. Payment tokens, which are means of payment, which are also regulated, like credit cards and other means of payments that you issue because there's anti-money laundering risks, and basically all the rest. And all the rest, they said, look, those are utility tokens, and they are effectively not regulated. That's not the term they used, but they basically said, look, if it's not an asset token, if it's not a payment token, well, then it's fine, right? You can also sell, soda or sneakers. It doesn't matter, right? It's basically a utility token, and as such, it's not regulated, and we're not gonna apply regulation just because it's crypto. And the core idea there is that they said, look, the law should apply in a technology neutral way, and just because you can easily trade and transfer on a peer-to-peer basis an asset doesn't mean that the asset is dangerous. As long as it doesn't qualify as a security or a means of payment, we're not gonna regulate it. That's the one thing, and I think that is the one thing that everybody got. The other thing is that FINMA said, you don't have to approach us, you don't have to come to us, you don't need a license. It doesn't matter. You want to have a payment token, asset token, utility token, you don't need to come to us and get a license. There are a few requirements you have to meet, but you can either do a self-assessment, you can talk to a law firm, but we don't want to be a bottleneck. And I think that's the game changer, because a lot of jurisdictions haven't really, that's like at the very beginning, a lot of jurisdictions haven't really gotten there. Like the SEC is the exact opposite, right? The SEC basically functions in a way that they say, at least, under Gary Gensler, it used to be a bit different before, but, ever since Gary Gensler's in office, he basically says everything except Bitcoin is a security. And so obviously that's not true. And I've talked to colleagues, from Georgetown University that says if it was so easy, all my students would have an A in class, right? Which they don't. And so the point is, it obviously is a bit more complicated. But the true problem is that people that actually want to get the license, they can't, right? And it's basically using the label security not as a way to, it's a security and we want to have more, use consumer protection and more disclosures. It's a security and we cannot allow it. And so they see themselves as gatekeepers that basically, decide whether or not a product is allowed to exist. And so FINMA did the opposite. They said, we are not a gatekeeper. Okay. If you do it, there's, a possibility that you violate financial market laws. We will step in and, shut down your company if needed, but only if you actually violate the laws. And I think that really, I mentioned the reasons for that before. I think the other reason also was that obviously because, Ethereum, the ICO was huge. The very first ICOs in 2017, they were gigantic. I mean, these projects, they raised, at that time, millions already, right? Which now are hundreds of millions because many of them actually just diversified their assets. And basically, it's insane actually when you think about the amount of money that actually went into these projects. And so obviously FINMA had to say, hey, we have to do something, right? Other regulators were not under pressure in that way because, there were no big ICOs in their country. They didn't actually have to act. And so that also was, there was certain pressure on FINMA to react. And I think they reacted in a very wise way. And so that was the first piece of legitimacy that you saw there. And then later on, Switzerland, what I must say, I gotta applaud, the people involved on all fronts, honestly. Like, yes, we did our part, but it requires so much more to actually create the regulatory framework we have right now, because it was early on clear that crypto poses challenges to the existing legal framework when it comes to various questions, such as, licenses for financial market infrastructures. Do we want to allow, blockchain-based stock exchanges, blockchain-based financial infrastructures? How are we going to deal in case of bankruptcy? All these questions. And what's the difference between pooling and not pooling? Where's there's truly an anti-money laundering risk? What does an intermediary do? There's so many questions that were not clear at that point. And so a lot of jurisdictions have just said, let's just create a blockchain law, like a blockchain act. And Switzerland intentionally did not go down that way because they said, look, whenever you have different statutes that talk about similar things, there's bound, you're gonna have conflicts between these acts. And the best example has nothing to do with crypto is the GDPR and the Data Act that has just been announced by the EU. And so if you ask people how do they relate, they say, oh well, it's unclear. It's like, okay, fantastic, well done. I mean, it doesn't help anybody, right? So Switzerland said, let's just update our law. Let's first identify in every single relevant statute, be it the bankruptcy statutes or the civil code or anywhere. Let's look at where the problems are from a crypto perspective, and let's just amend those statutes. And that's what Switzerland did. They basically released a blanket ordinance, or well, first a blanket statute and then an ordinance that basically updated all statutes and the ordinances accordingly to basically just fill in the gaps that we had. And so I must say, look, we are now in a situation where I'm actually confident to say that Switzerland does have the most mature crypto framework. And that led to a lot of talent to come here. And it also led to situations in which the tax authorities had to, level up their game. They had to understand how these things work. Accountants have to figure it out. There's a lot of talent we have here from universities. So it's really just the entire ecosystem, like the Crypto Valley, in which you guys have been added to the top 50 report, right? So congratulations on that. And so, the crypto buying is booming and it's still very, very active because it does actually offer much more than just regulation. And, coming back to your original question, I do think that it's fantastic to see how, other countries are picking up. And talking about MiCA specifically, to understand why MiCA was introduced, you have to understand that there's always two legal issues when anybody, for example, issues a token or a service. So first of all, you have to figure out, where do I want to be domiciled? Where do I want to incorporate? Because that's going to be your home, right? And as always, your home, you have to follow the rules of the house in which you live, and you have to figure out, if there's rules in Switzerland, okay, those are the rules I have to follow because I'm a resident or a citizen or a company registered here. But then you basically go out there and you start selling goods. And, in the old days, that was basically, well, you open a store, down the street, and maybe you had an online store, where you basically sold to people in Switzerland, they could order online. But crypto is natively worldwide, right? It's basically it's so much connected to the entire planet that it's really pointless to say, in a way, where a company is domiciled. That's why people set up shop in the BVI, Cayman Islands, and Dubai, and Panama, you name it, because nobody really cares. I mean, as long as the interface looks good and the reputation is good, nobody really cares where they're registered. At least from a user perspective, investors are a bit more critical. But obviously, regulators also don't care because they say, look, if I'm the German BaFin, the German financial market authorities, and you offer services to German users or you sell tokens to German users, they're obviously going to say, I don't, it's great for you that, your home jurisdiction thinks, all's fine. But, maybe we have a different view on that. And I remember very well in 2018, I went to a panel conversation in Geneva, and somebody from the audience asked, so if I have a utility token classification in Switzerland, does that mean I can sell that token everywhere in the world without any trouble? And the answer was no. And so the answer was, okay, so what do we have to do? Like, what does it help us? And we had to tell him, look, honestly, the only thing to find out, you have to go to every single jurisdiction that you don't exclude specifically from your sale, which, any exclusion requires you to do KYC, which means you have to actually check residences, etc. So either you just say, I don't care, it can go full Monty and everybody can buy, or you start excluding any jurisdictions and you have to do KYC, and then you have to think, okay, which ones do I exclude? Okay, so there's the sanctioned ones, maybe like Iran is not a good idea, North Korea maybe also not a good idea, then maybe the US is tricky because of the SEC, maybe Germany, I don't know. So, like, how can we figure out where we can issue tokens and where not? And so, as I said initially, the idea never was that people have, to go to an expensive corporate law firm for any type of token offering. Much less having to go to 26 different law firms in just Europe to figure out these things. So that explains why MiCA is fantastic, because it actually creates a unified market for crypto offerings, tokens, and services alike. And I think that's great to create regulatory certainty, and it's going to be very helpful. I think it also is great to see that every single country now, doesn't matter if they think the blockchain is fantastic or interesting or dangerous, they have to offer, under the same laws, licenses. And some of them might, maybe intentionally slow down the processes to be unattractive. Others may say that's a great, competitive advantage if we're early in that space. But I think it's good, it disrupts the European regulators and basically the national financial market authorities, and really forces them to grapple with blockchain as a whole, and and these individual offerings. And when you talk about content, I'm not a MiCA expert by any means, but I think the two things it really focuses on are centralized services, basically custody services, brokerage services where we basically give away custody. So everything that's not Web3, basically where you remain in control, but everything where you actually hand over control over your assets, which is regulated for good reasons. So I guess that's a good reason to actually make sure that they get a license in Europe as well. And the other thing is stablecoins. And again, stablecoin regulation, probably a good thing. It's a very old topic that we had, with the Tether FUD that has been distributed since 2015 to, Terra Luna, to FTX. Well, no, that wasn't the stablecoin. But anyways, you get the point, right? It's basically exactly the FTXs, so decentralized services, brokerages, custodians, and the stablecoins, which, Terra Luna and others. And so basically these are the two main focus points of MiCA. And I personally think that's a good start. And maybe now Europe will, when you say Switzerland is at 80%, maybe they're now at 15, which is great, or 20. It's a good start, right? There's so many questions still open, but you have to see that it's a different approach, right? And if you actually want to create a unified market for 26 or more jurisdictions, well, you have to start somewhere, and I think that's definitely a great first step.
Nice. Thanks. Can we touch upon Asia a bit?
Sure.
Yeah, I just don't want to leave Asia out. We've talked a bit about the US, Europe. Singapore is doing well. I think it's also one of the friendlier jurisdictions. And from what I know, the approach is also to a large extent modeled after Switzerland, especially when it comes to the token classification. Thailand has been making some move. India recently in the news, even when it comes to pushing for compliance of centralized actors or like custody first actors also. I would say we're seeing a worldwide sort of move in the right direction. The question is, when do we start over regulating innovation? And it's been a question that is not new by any means. It's like, in the US, I would say it's a primary challenge right now. Even formulating this question is tricky, right? Because asking what's the balance, or where should we stop with the regulation? How much should we apply to projects and to innovation? It's a very complex question, and the answer is probably even more complicated. Do you think the markets should just self-regulate, or do you think we should have like a more or less unified global framework at some point? Like MiCA is I think the largest endeavor in this direction, right, across the EU.
I think that's fair to say. On the point of Asia, I was lucky enough to be at the World Economic Forum, where basically, the places outside of the World Economic Forum, there's a lot of blockchain companies and interest groups that are there, gathering at the beginning of the year, talking about, the crypto space 2024. And so I talked to a lot of people, and it was interesting to see and ask him, where are you going to focus your efforts? Conferences, or maybe for projects, or like these interest groups, where are you going to focus? And they all said Asia, all of them, right? And that's very interesting, because I've personally only traveled in Asia, a little bit as a tourist, but I haven't had the opportunity to, let's say, visit, Japan or Singapore, and see personally what's really happening there. But everything I've heard is that especially Japan is becoming an extremely crypto friendly nation, much more attractive. Um, Singapore, as you mentioned, obviously. So we had, one of the co-founders of MME is the chairman of Signum Bank, which has basically two headquarters, one in Zurich and one in Singapore. And I must say, I'm really interested to see how this is developing. I have a feeling right now, just from my past experience of the past 6 years, you do still see a bit of a divide when you talk about the product. So, like, apart from layer ones that basically are active anywhere, I think there's a big divide, at least as I've perceived it, still between the culture in Asia and maybe Europe and the West. Maybe different needs. It's maybe difficult to actually jump the gap and actually be successful in both markets. But I think I think what we're all looking for is this billion users application that obviously would have to jump that gap. And I hope that we're gonna get there with the increase of regulation in Asia. But the other thing that you mentioned is when is regulation too much? And I think that's a really interesting question, because when you look at we often talk about the ideas of blockchain, and you hear the same things, disintermediate, liberate people, get away from Wall Street and all these middlemen that make all that money. But nobody, or very rarely you hear about consumer protection. Like, obviously, be your own bank is a good way, in a sense, and you say we want to protect you from bank runs. But most Western jurisdictions have solid insurance schemes in place that actually, if there's a bank run, they're going to be fine, right? It's not like, for a Swiss person, it's not like in Argentina or elsewhere, right, where you have rampant inflation and you basically just don't trust your bank because maybe your government's going to take your money away. Like in the West, the idea was always a different one, right? It's kind of like of empowerment, but it was never about consumer protection. And so we have to see that the existing regulators, it's a lot about consumer protection. That's really a core idea of it. And so it does not surprise me that most regulators are saying this is dangerous because FTX happens and Terra Luna happens, and all these other shenanigans, which, we must admit there's just still too many bad actors in the space. Obviously, if it's permissionless, that means that anybody can actually come and do their harm and do damage. And so I think the idea, if you say, okay, it's permissionless, that means that we cannot control who is allowed to offer services on Web3. And we also have to acknowledge that people that have no intermediaries are on their own. And I personally always liked the fact that people said, look, yes, there's exploits, but exploits happen. And in the crypto space, the people who are affected by these exploits, they don't cry out for regulation. They understand. They understand that it's a sacrifice, it's a risk, and that there's a lot to gain. They're in the frontier, but there's also a lot to lose. And I've never heard anybody saying, "Oh no, where's the regulators when we need them?" No, they didn't call for regulators. They said, "You know what? That's the difference. It's just part of the game." And I think that's something that when we want to grow up, we have to see not everybody's willing to do that. And so I liked it a lot when Vitalik Buterin at the end of 2022 on a Bankless podcast mentioned that talked about adoption and basically said, okay, where do you see Ethereum now and in the future? And he made a very good analogy. He says, I think from an adoption point of view, there's kind of like three stages. There's Esperanto stage, there's the Linux stage, and there's the internet stage. And so Esperanto is basically, yes, it's there and some people use it, but no, it's not mainstream success. Linux, yes, in a way it is a mainstream success for servers, etc., but not for personal computers necessarily. And the internet obviously is the most successful technology of all times. And so he personally said that he thinks that Ethereum and the blockchain space as a whole has kind of reached the Linux phase. And now the question is, are we going to go fully mainstream? And I think that's the goal. We want to get there, but if we do this, we have to grapple with user protection. Because while the first 100,000 or 200,000 users were fine with losing all their assets because they knew what the risk is, the new wave won't. And so automatically you have to consider, can a completely permissionless system function? How can we actually protect users? And those are the truly, truly difficult questions.
Is it primarily, or should it be primarily about protection, or should it be about education? Because if we go back to, again, the early days of the internet, you get an email saying that you've inherited, I don't know, 20 kilos of gold, but you have to send your whatever address or credit card or whatever it might be over, and that's the way they verify your obvious scams, right? And if we receive them now, we just, even if it makes it past the spam filter, we just smile gently and click a button reporting either a spam or a phishing attack or whatever it is. We've grown into being sort of digital natives. Our kids definitely are digital natives. They grow up with phones, internet, computers. Even if you take it away from them, they still find a way, obviously. Isn't this more of a generational change potentially, where we're sort of fluent in most things blockchain? It's difficult to explain it to the generation of our parents, but the kids, the teenagers, they know what NFTs are. They might not know how it works, but they know what it is, right? So I'm just thinking whether all the adoption that we've been talking about ever since I have been present in the space, I kept hearing about mass adoption this, mass adoption that, but maybe we just don't really appreciate how long of a process it really is.
I think that's an extremely good point. Information is going to be key. And, for that reason, I actually hold a lot of presentations. Honestly, pretty much anybody that is interested, I'm more than happy to go there and, talk to them, be it media outlets or be it, whatever, accountants or, other people that actually just want to know. And they basically say, look, I don't have a good feeling about this. I think we all start in a way as crypto skeptics, because I do think that information is power and it actually will help, our mission a lot. What I always liked in the crypto space, when you venture around in Reddit and among people that actually understand, they've early on classified risks in different risk groups. The ones you hear most about is smart contract risks. You hear about counterparty risks. And so I think that alone is extremely helpful to basically classify and say, okay, this is an offering, right? It's basically, it's called FTX. So what's the risk, right? obviously there's a huge counterparty risk because you're going to give custody over your assets to a third party that is, I don't know, in the Bahamas, unsupervised. So telling them that there's a huge counterparty risk, is it going to help? I'm not sure, right? Will people say, yeah, okay, yeah, but I mean, everybody uses it, it's Super Bowl, there were advertisements. And so I think there's limits to what information can do. I think, also talking about smart contracts risks, you can tell people, okay, there's smart contract risks, and then, oops, there's a rug pull, and all the money's gone and the guy disappeared. Okay, so are people going to be deterred by using it? I think it's a part of it. But I think we have to be smart about understanding what the risks are and how we can actually tackle them. So mainly, make an example about AML, for example. Like I've often argued, and I've been, I've actually changed my mind a bit on it, but I've, initially often argued that basically money laundering is a victimless crime, which, I think it might be true in the end, but the point is that the money came from somewhere, and often there were victims involved in the process of getting to that money, right? Be it drugs or, human trafficking or whatever. So, but even if that's the case, we have to understand, what does AML actually want to achieve? And so if we talk about protecting users' funds, I think that Switzerland did the right thing to say this is heavily regulated. Like being a custodial service provider that basically pools consumer assets requires a banking license under Swiss law to operate, unless they have, can make use of one of various exceptions. They can get a bank guarantee from another bank or from an actual bank, or they can use, other ways to actually segregate their assets and make sure that if they fall into bankruptcy, those assets are automatically sorted out and given back to the real owners. But I do think but it's correct to say, look, as soon as you actually accept user funds, you really need to be regulated. And the same is for stablecoins. Stablecoin regulation, same story, right? If you do what Circle and Tether do, on a big scale, you obviously have to ask yourself, how can we protect consumers there? And so I think that one of the reasons why Switzerland never had a huge blockchain scandal, even, despite the size of the blockchain industry here, is because we actually had smart regulation. Now, talking about AML, it's completely different, right? What does AML actually protect, right? It protects kind of the financial market as a whole, the legitimacy of it. It wants to, it basically tells intermediaries that they have to follow certain rules in order to reduce the risks of being abused by criminals. And so what's interesting is that if you are a financial intermediary and you do your due diligence, you follow the law, and you're still abused, well, you're not going to be, liable necessarily for that, because the point is you have to follow those rules. And so, when I talk to colleagues also at FINMA and other regulators, they basically say the argument that the anti-money laundering risk is large or not large, that's not the point. It's really a yes or no question. Are you an intermediary or are you not? If you're not, you don't have to do anything. If you are an intermediary, you have to do the whole shebang. And then you think about, okay, I see that point. I'm an intermediary, like let's say a bank, or I'm a broker that actually has all these assets, and I basically can shuffle them around, and if we lose completely all trace, fine, I get that. But then you have all these on-chain activities where you can go on Subscan and see what's happening on the LF0 blockchain, and it's completely transparent. And you can say, just because I have a user interface and allow people to sign transactions, that intermediation, if you want to call it that, it doesn't even appear on chain, right? It's basically, it doesn't actually touch the data on chain at all, right? Even if you set up smart contracts and route the transaction through your smart contracts to charge a fee for operating a user interface, sure, you help them, sure, you kind of intermediate, but you don't break the connection, right? And that's what it's all about. The reason why financial intermediation is risky or tricky is because it makes it very difficult to follow the money, right? And that's what it's all about when you talk about financial crimes. You want to be able to follow the money, and you want to make sure that people who help hide these traces, have to follow certain rules. And so nobody asks the question, okay, let's assume there's money that basically is transferred online from address to address. People say, okay, you are a user face operator, you need to follow AML because you are an intermediary. Nobody asks the question as to, what does that help? It doesn't help anything. And so I think that's a part of a bad regulation, where you basically just, for the sake of it, you want to regulate because you basically just are so used to the old way of how things were done. without actually thinking, is this still needed? Or maybe is there a better way to do things? Do we want to, make sure that people can, have better ways to find out who the individuals behind transactions are, to actually really protect users that have been fallen victim to crimes? And so that's something what I miss a bit, in the entire debate, and especially the AML aspect is pushed by FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force, which is often criticized as a not very democratic institution that basically creates laws that have to be followed by the member countries unless you want to end up on a gray or a blacklist. And so Switzerland has really followed with those laws. They actually did even a Swiss finish to basically require a bit more. But on the user interface side, that's something that is still an open debate. And I'm very, very much hoping that FINMA and other regulators will not try to shut down graphical user interfaces just because they are the best way to interact with the blockchain. Because if that happens, the bad people who will launder money, they know how to use Truffle, they know how to use Brownie and other command line interfaces, so they're not going to be affected. You're not going to prevent money laundering from happening on chain to the extent that's actually possible, which is a different debate. But you're just going to avoid mass consumer adoption, and yeah, you see, it's a topic that I think about a lot, and it remains to be seen how this is going to be tackled with.
Yeah, we kind of have a lot of similar debates whenever the privacy topic comes up, right? Because this is also, on one hand, we've got the transparent blockchains, and on the other, anytime you're about to send a bit of crypto to a friend or whoever, they're able to track it back and see your entire wallet, which is just weird. It's just weird. So this kind of goes, where I'm going with this is a question of, well, is privacy compliant? Is it non-compliant? Is it the right way to ask this question? What does it even mean that privacy is compliant or non-compliant if we assume that it's a fundamental human right, really? We've been thinking about this for a very, very long time. And also thanks to you and your team's support, of course, we kind of were able to kind of put it into a product. So one question I would have with regards to this is about on-chain privacy and how you see it from a legal standpoint.
I think it's a fantastic question, mainly because it's true to say that there is a fundamental right to privacy that, especially when we talk about our financial assets, and that should also apply on chain. And more people start to realize that this transparency that the blockchain creates is also dangerous, right? Because we talk about privacy and have to ask ourselves, who are we trying to protect against? And when I lived in the United States, I realized, and actually was in a fantastic presentation of a privacy specialist, and he explained what the GDPR was all about. Because Americans haven't understood, why the GDPR, like what's the point? And the reason why they didn't understand is because in the United States, apparently, quoting him, privacy was always meant against the government, right? The point always was that the government is spying on you, and the government, which is, yeah, I guess true, especially in the case of the US government. But they said privacy is by principle a fundamental right against the government, not necessarily against others. When you look at constitutional law in the United States, it's really, they use the right of privacy right now actually to basically prevent legislation against contraception, for example, because they say you have a privacy, right to privacy in your bedroom, how you want to contracept or not contracept, etc. So it's this concept of a defense against the government's power. It's very important in the United States. And so in Europe, we have a different approach, right? Early on, privacy was really more against private actors, basically against companies that collect too much of our data. And so this explains where the GDPR comes from, right? It's against the Facebooks and the Googles and these data behemoths that collect all our data and basically make money with it. And so the privacy conversation was more about how can we make sure that people actually, opt in, look at the cookie debate. It becomes insane, because you have these requirements that every single company has to comply with under the GDPR and now under the Data Act and, with the cookies, etc. Then you wonder, whether this probably goes a bit too far. And I think now in the blockchain space, we do see these views clash, to a certain extent, because when people talk about privacy, it's often not clear what privacy they mean. And so when you look at the actions of OFAC, they basically went after Tornado Cash because they said there's a lot of North Korean actors and other actors that use these tools to launder funds, and so we need to shut them down. And so privacy got a really bad label, as if it's like a bad thing. And when you looked at the debate there, people say this is terrible to basically shut them down, because obviously, as an example, if you are in Russia and you want to contribute to the Ukrainian effort, well, what are you going to do? And how are you going to contribute? Well, great, you can actually just contribute via Tornado Cash. And so obviously the solution is not to forbid technology, but the question remains: how can you make sure that you meet the requirements of governments? Because most, especially if you look at the US government, any solution that they will basically support is most likely going to be a solution that allows the government to make sure that they can actually check what happens if they need to. And so this is going to be a sellout to a certain extent, I agree. But still, I do believe that it is something that we probably have to accept if you want to go full mainstream. Because if you want to have the support of regulators, we probably have to start somewhere. We have to make compromises as well. Because I personally do believe, and maybe that's, because I am I'm from Europe, that it's much more important that we actually have the right to privacy against others, against prying eyes of individuals that want to see how much we spend. Because I personally have the same issue. Do I want to open a new address for every single interaction? No, that's going to be horrible, right? I would like to have this decentralized identity, and I would like to be able to actually just have one login with social recovery, etc. Right? And so basically, like what you guys are building with Liminal, I think is a fantastic approach. And so I really hope that in this conversation, people can get together and say, look, we really have to focus what we want to achieve. I think if the goal is to say it's none of the government's interest to know how much I own or how much I do, I think we cannot expect their support.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a tricky thing. Like, to me, privacy is primarily a factor for better UX. Honestly, I also don't like prying eyes, obviously, and even if you compare it to real life scenarios, I mean, there's a reason that bathrooms have doors. It doesn't mean that you're doing bad things in the bathroom. It just means that you want to be alone. I'm sure we'll get there. Like, we're going to propose some solution. Maybe the industry will like it, maybe it won't, but I'm pretty sure it will. I think we're running a bit over time, so it's awesome talking with you, but we probably need to wrap up. Any closing thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I think on the last topic, we talk about privacy and compliance. I think, we have to forget about this notion of this binary choice between privacy and compliance. I do think that technology allows us to actually achieve both and actually find good middle ways. But that only works if developers have the liberty to develop and deploy and test out solutions without being afraid that they're going to be ending up in jail or basically ending up in a lawsuit. So I think I really appeal to any legislator or regulator, listening to this, that let this play out a bit, wait a bit, wait and see, because I'm pretty sure that we're going to have in the near future fantastic new products that actually can combine these two requirements in ways we do not see now. And if we start now with forbidding technologies such as mixers, we might never get there, which would not be in anybody's interest.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for taking the time of your day. It was a real pleasure to have you, and thank you for all the work we've been doing, and I'm pretty sure we will for the foreseeable future.
Pleasure was all mine.
That being said, my name is Anthony, and I'm building the Aleph Zero ecosystem together with the Aleph Zero team. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And if you're a founder that is looking to incorporate in Switzerland, then definitely reach out to Michael and his team. For the last 6 years of working together, we have nothing but great things to say about our entire collaboration, the support that we've received. Give us a like, subscribe. Marketing told me to say that, and we'll be back with a new episode next week.